Hello student, I, Dr. Shafali Jain, Assistant Professor, Tirthankar Mavi University. Student, today we discuss about the block third topic effective demand. Effective demand means the value of aggregate demand at the point of aggregate demand function is where it is intersected by aggregate supply function and it is given by the Lord Keynes. The logical starting point of Keynes' theory of employment is the principle of effective demand. In a capitalist economy, the level of employment depend on effective demand. This unemployment result from a deficiency of effective demand, and the level of unemployment can be raised by increasing the level of effective demand. So, Professor Dillard considers the principle of effective demand to be logical starting point of Keynesian theory of employment. If we take the demand, what is the demand? Demand means desire. It becomes effective when income is spent in buying, consumption goods and investment goods. Keynes used the term effective demand to denote the total demand for goods and services at various levels of employment. Different level of employment represent different level of aggregate demand, but there can be a level of employment where effective demand equal to aggregate supply. So, Keynes says at different level of employment, aggregate demand can be different. I have also explained you, but there is a level of aggregate demand at which it is equal to aggregate supply, where it is aggregate demand and aggregate supply intersect each other. And according to Keynes' theory of employment, the level of employment depends upon the level of aggregate demand at which it is equal to aggregate supply. This position is known as the equilibrium point. It means Keynes says where the aggregate demand and aggregate supply intersect to each other. This point is called the equilibrium position, and this point is called effective demand. So Keynes Keynes says that effective demand is a main variable to increase the level of employment. So effective demand is that point in which Keynes word the value of D means aggregate demand, at the point of aggregate demand function where it is intersect by the aggregate supply function will be called the effective demand. Thus, according to Keynes, the level of employment is determined by effective demand, which is in turn is determined by aggregate demand price and aggregate supply price. So, effective demand refers to the willingness and ability of consumers to purchase goods at different prices. It shows the amount of goods that consumers are actually buying supported by their ability to pay. In Keynes' macroeconomics theory, effective demand is the point of equilibrium where aggregate demand equal to aggregate supply. The importance of Keynes' views is that effective demand may be insufficient to achieve full employment due to unemployment and workers without income to produce unsold goods. So, the two determinants of effective demands are consumptions and investment expenditure. When income increases, consumption expenditure also increases, but by less than the increase in income. Thus, there arises a gap between income and consumption, which leads to decline in the volume of employment. So, Keynes focus When the demand increases, the income also increases. His theory also objections of the classical theory, as which I have discussed in the previous video. As you know, according to classical, there will be always a full employment in a free enterprises. Uh, Capitalist economy because of the operations of sales laws and wage price flexibility. This classical economic scheme underserved attack during the Great Depression years of 1930 at the hands of J.M. Keynes. He rejected the notion of full employment and instead suggested full employment as a special case. He also says that it is not a general case. Full employment is a temporary phenomena. So he claims his theory to be general, applicable at any point of time. uh, uh, Keynes Theories Journal in this book, his book, The Journal Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, 1936. Keynes gave his theory. He not only criticized the classicals, macroeconomics. So Keynes not only criticized the classical macroeconomics, but also presented a new theory of income and employment. He is also described by economists as a revolutionary once in the sense that it was Keynes who salvaged the capitalist economy from the destructions in the 1930, and and he also gave a reversionary point, and he also his theory logical points demand. In an economy, effective demand depends on two factors: aggregate demand supply, aggregate demand price, and aggregate supply price. Now discuss aggregate demand. Aggregate demand price, aggregate demand schedule or aggregate demand function. We will also discuss aggregate demand price and aggregate demand schedule or aggregate demand function. Aggregate demand price. Aggregate demand price refers to the total amount which all the producer expect to receive by selling the output produced at a given level of employment. So, uh, in the simple words, it refers to expected revenue from the sale of output at a particular level of employment. So, aggregate demand price, the amount of money or price which all entrepreneurs expect to receive from the sale of output produced by a given number of men employed. I think so. Each level of employment is associated with a particular aggregate supply price, and there are different aggregate demand price from different level of employment. So, they are also discuss the definitions. The aggregate demand price at any level of employment is the amount of money which all entrepreneurs is an economy taken together rarely do expect that they will be received if they sell the output produced by this given number of men. Aggregate. So, aggregate demand schedule showing relationship between employment and expected price is called aggregate demand schedule. I will also discuss the schedule. Aggregate, just a minute. Hmm. Uh, Aggregate demand function is a schedule of a various amount of money which the entrepreneur is an economic from the sale of their output and varying level of employment. So the aggregate price for the output of any given amount of employment is the total sum of money or proceeds which is expected from the sale of the output produced when the when that amount of labor is implied. Thus, aggregate demand price is amount of money which the entrepreneurs expect to get by selling the output produced by the number of men employed. In other words, it refers to the expected revenue from the sale of the output produced equal level of employment, and different aggregate demand prices relate to different level of employment as you see in the schedule. Uh, this statement, this is due showing the various aggregate demand prices at different level of employment is called the aggregate demand price schedule or aggregate demand function. The aggregate demand function, according to case, relates any given level of employment to the expected proceeds from the level of employment. Here also see our table. The table reveals with the increase in the level of employment. You can see increase in the level of employment proceed expected rise. Here you can see proceed expected rise at the lower level of employment decline when just a minute, when 40 lakh when 40 lakh people are provided jobs and it is rate of 540 crores and according to Keynes when 30 when the level of employment also increase and 50 lakh people are provided jobs and it produced 600 crores. According to Keynes, the aggregate demand function is an aggregate function. Function is an increasing function. Is a here aggregate demand is a function of and means employment. So increasing function of the level of employment. And so AD is a function where D is proceed where entrepreneur expected employment of the N means man's. The aggregate curve here you also see the aggregate curve here. The aggregate curve can be drawn on the basis of the above schedule. It slope upward. Here you see upward from left to right because as the level of employment increases, aggregate demand price also rises. Show the curve in the figure as you see, and the different aggregate demands show the different level of employment. Here you see both curve are different. In here you can see. So I think you have to understood the aggregate demand. Aggregate demand in expected revenue. The main determinant of the aggregate demand is consumption expenditure and investment demand. These is the total demand for goods and services in an economy at various level of employment. Total demand for goods and services by the people is the sum total of all demand needs for the consumptions investment. In other words, the sum of the consumption expenditures and investment expenditure investment expenditure also constitute demand in a two-sector economy. In order to meet such demand, people are employed to produce all kinds of goods, both consumption goods and investment goods. However, to complete our discussion on the effective demand, we need another components of the effective demand as the component of the government expenditure. Thus, effective demand will be defined as the total of the all expenditure, as you know. C plus I plus G, where C's stand for the consumption expenditures, I stand for the investment expenditure, and G stand for the government expenditure. Here we can know government expenditure as the complete of trade demand. According to Keynes, the level of employment is determined by the effective demand, which in turn are determined by aggregate demand function. Aggregate demand price and aggregate supply function or aggregate supply price. In Keynes what? The value of D, aggregate demand, at the point of aggregate demand function, where it is intersected by the aggregate supply function, will be called the effective demand. And effective demand determined by the consumptions and by the expenditure and investment. Hope student you well understood uh, it. Now we discuss about the aggregate supply. Aggregate supply price refers to that minimum amount of money which all entrepreneurs have to spend in order to produce output at a given level at a given level of employment. In other words, it is the cost of production. Here, aggregate supply price of the output for given amount of employment is expression of proceed which will just make it worthwhile for the entrepreneurs to give the employment. So, so it means employer hire and purchase various inputs and raw materials to produce goods. Thus, productions involve cost. If sales revenue from the sale of output produced exceed cost of production at a given level of employment and output, the entrepreneur would be induced to employ more labor and other inputs to produce more. Any given level of employment of labor, credit supply price is the total amount of money that all entrepreneurs in the economy expect to receive from the sale of output produced by given number of laborers employed. For each particular level of employment, there is an aggregate supply price. Here, by price, we get amount of money received which a producer received from the sale of the output. Sale proceed. Thus, aggregate supply price refers to the proceed from the sale of output at each level of employment. And here are different aggregate supply prices for the different level of employment. If this information is expressed in our tabulations forms, we can also obtain also see the table here. Hmm. Here is a table. Aggregate supply is a function of level of employment, and here level of employment you can see that uh, when the level of employment is 10 lakh, the aggregate supply price 120. When it increases and it becomes 20, the aggregate supply price 240. When it's the level of employment also increases 30, the level of the aggregate supply price 360. And when the level of employment also increases at it become 40, the aggregate supply price 480. And when the level of employment also increases and it become 50, the aggregate supply price also become increase 600. And when the level of employment also become 50, it also increases because uh, after a time the full employment, because here the full employment and the level of employment it cannot be increased. It is the 50 is the full employment condition. So in this schedule, we can also understood at any given level of employment of level aggregate supply price, the total amount of money which all entrepreneur in the economy taken together must expect to receive from the sale of the output reduced by that given number of men. And if it is to be just worth employing them, in brief, the aggregate supply price refers to the proceed necessary from the sale of output at a particular level of employment. Thus, each level of employment in the economy is related to a particular aggregate supply price. And there are different aggregate supply prices for different level of employment. As I also also seeing a statement, various aggregate supply prices at a different level of employment is called the aggregate supply price schedule, which is also seen in the script, and or aggregate supply function. In the word of Professor Dillard, the aggregate supply function is a schedule of the minimum amount of proceed required to induce varying quantities of employment, which is showing in the table. As you see, the table reveals that aggregate supply price rise with the increase in the level of employment. If entrepreneurs are to provide employment to 20 lakh workers, they must receive 240 crores for the sale of the output produced by them. If only when they expect to receive the minimum amount of proceed. So, when the economy reaches the level of full employment, here the full employment level price become 600 and continue increase, but there is no further increase in the employment. According to Keynes, the aggregate supply function is an increased function of the level of employment and is expressed here as is equal to function of and. It means aggregate supply price of the output from implying a number. The aggregate supply here also see aggregate supply curve. You see the aggregate supply curve can be drawn the basis of the schedule epsilon upward. You see epsilon upward from left to right because the necessary expected proceed increase. The level of employment also rises. But when the economy reaches the level of full employment, here it is a full employment point, aggregate supply curve vertical. Here you can see it come vertical even with the increase in aggregate supply price. It is not possible to provide more employment as the economy has attained the level of full employment. So you can understand that determination of the effective demand in an economy effective demand depends on factors as I have also discussed you, aggregate demand price and aggregate supply price. So the level of employment at which aggregate demand becomes equal to aggregate supply, AD equal to AS is called equilibrium. You know that. So, it is at this level of equilibrium that effective demand is determined. The level of employment is determined at the point where the aggregate demand price equal to the aggregate supply price. In other words, it is the point where entrepreneurs expect to receive equal what they must receive and their profit are maximized. This point is called the demand, and here it is an normal profit. So long as the aggregate demand price is higher than the aggregate, you can also see in this schedule. Uh, so long as the demand price is higher than the aggregate supply price, prospect of getting additional profit are greater when more workers are provided employment, and revenue rise more than the process necessary cost. This process will continue till the aggregate demand price equal to the aggregate supply price and a point if the demand are received. It is point in this institute. It is the point 50,000 is the full employment level, and it's in this point aggregate demand is also 600 and aggregate supply is also 600, and it is the called fixed demand. So level of employment, the point of effective demand is however not necessarily one of the employment, but underemployment equilibrium. If the entrepreneur try to provide more employment after this point, aggregate supply price exceed and the uh, aggregate demand price indicating that the total cost are higher than the total revenue, and there are losses. Here you can see it's a disequilibrium, and when the in this level the aggregate demand is more than the aggregate supply, so the companies are also increased to increasing the number of employment, and here also aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply here also, and it is the equilibrium point where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. It is the full employment, and after the full employment it is not possible to increase the people, but when the production also trying to increase, in this condition aggregate supply is more than aggregate demand and there is the losses point. If aggregate demand price is raises still further, it will lead to inflation also. Inflation, because increase employment and output is possible beyond the level of employment. This following the table explain the determinations of the point of effective demand. As you saw the table, the aggregate price is higher than the aggregate supply price. It is profitable for the entrepreneur to employ more workers when they expect to receive 360 and 120, 360 crore and 420 crore, 480 crore and 540 crore. And crore when the proceed necessary amounting only 120, 240 crore, 360 crore and 480 crore. They will provide increased employment to 2 lakh to 3 lakh, 30 lakhs workers respectively. But when the proceed necessary and the proceed expectation is equal at 600 crore, the level of employment rises 50 lakhs. Point of effective demand. So similar level of employment. It is we assume the full employment level, and 50 lakh workers in the economy. It will necessity to drawing up of the new aggregate demand. Demand price situation in the table. As so above table indicates when the level of employment is 50 lakhs, then the both aggregate demand and aggregate supply are equal at 600 crore, and it is an equilibrium situation. The aggregate demand under this situation is called the effective demand. You can see it in the diagram. In this figure, the employment is shown on x-axis here. You see the employment expected to receive on y-axis here. Y-axis. AD is aggregate demand curve. AS is aggregate supply curve. Both intersect to each other. Point E, aggregate demand at the point E will be called the effective demand. Effective demand point. E is an equilibrium point. Point E shows that the equilibrium position level of employment. And OQ and expected receipt OP. So here you see the expected receipt OP and OQ is the employment level. So you can see in this diagram that curves AD and AS intersect each other at the point of E. At the point of A, and this is effective demand where OQ workers are employed, and at the point entrepreneur expected a profit of maximum. Here you see the AD is above than the AS. At any point other than this, the entrepreneur will be either incurs losses or subnormal and Q1 OQ1 level of employment, the proceed expected revenue and more than the proceed increasing proceed necessary cost. So this indicates that AD is more than the AS. Indicate that it is possible for the entrepreneurs to provide increasing employment to workers till the point of OQ level is reached where the proceed expected are necessarily equal at the point E. So it would not be, however, profitable for the entrepreneur if increase employment beyond this level, beyond the level of OQ, because proceed necessary cost exceed and proceed expected revenue because because AD is more than AS. So proceed necessary cost exceed proceed expected. Uh, so this shows losses. Here you can also see that in this diagram, in the next diagram, it's you can see equilibrium needs not coincide with full employment. It can be possible even under less than employment. It is shown in the figure. AS is aggregate supply curve and AD. And AD1, AD2 are different aggregate supply curve. Here you see it's full employment level and AD1 and AD2. Also, aggregate supply curve. Aggregate demand is AD. That equilibrium is point E. Here, AD is equilibrium point E. Here you see, and signifies under an employment equilibrium. Economy will have full employment equilibrium only when the OQ1 numbers of levers get employment. ED2 E2 indicates over full employment equilibrium. Here you can see that economy get the full employment E point. It is a underemployment and OQ is a full employment level and it is a E1 and E2 is a over full employment level. So Keynes says that full employment is not a normal condition. While classical economics says that employment is a normal condition. So it's shown that to reach the economic level of human employment requires servicing of the point of effective demand by increasing the aggregate demand. Where E point is the effective demand, which determines the O level of employment, and full employment for the it requires a raising at the point of the effective demand. This is possible by raising the demand curve. This by raising the demand curve 81, where it intersect demand supply AS curve E1.1 point E1. This is a new point of effective demand which provides an optimal level of employment OQ1 to economy. If the aggregate demand function is raised beyond the point, economy will experience inflation because the existing resources are fully employed and their supply cannot be increased at vertical shape. So, resources fully employed and the supply cannot be increased during the short run, but it apparent from the vertical position of the X curve in the AX curve, as you see in the here. So, the principle of effective demand is more important contributions of the Keynes. That is, source of Keynes theory of employment. And here is a very important effective demand because, as I also discussed, the effective demand determines the level of employment in the economy. When the effective demand increases, employment also increases. And the decline is in fact what increases the level of employment. This unemployment is a cause caused by a deficiency of effective demand. Effective demand represented total expenditure on total output produced at an equilibrium level of employment. It indicates the volume of total output which equal normal national income. National income equal national expenditure. National expenditure consists of expenditure on consumption, goods and investment goods. Some determinants of effective demand and the level of employment are consumption and investment. In briefly, we can say effective demand is equal to value of national output is equal to volume of employment is equal to national income is equal to national expenditures is equal to expenditure on consumption goods plus expenditure on investment goods. In the each analysis of effective demand, consumptions and investment expenditure relates to the private sector because Keynes considers government expenditure as autonomous, but the post-Keynesian economics include government expenditure as a components of effective demand. Thus, effective demand D is equal to private consumption expenditure plus private investment plus government expenditure. So we may conclude that importance of the principle of effective demand lies in the pointing out the cause of pointing out that unemployment, and we can say after discussing theory that unemployment is caused by the deficiency of effective demand, and it can be removed by an increase in the consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. In case the private expenditure are insufficient and ineffective in bringing about the required level of employment. So the same can be achieved by government expenditure. Thus, the principle of effective demand is the basis of the theory of employment. So with it, but it is also this theory also criticized in different points. Also, criticism of effective demands. Oh, sorry, it criticism, doubtful theory, factory demand is also expected demand. Uh, Next step, no complete relationship between factory demand, income and employment, non-applicability to underdeveloped economies, and a narrow concept. First of all, it is a doubtful theory. They are some of the most common criticisms of the factory demand theory of climate inflation. One criticism is that Keynesian policies can lead to inflationary pressure. Criticism argue that excessive government spending or loose monetary policy may overstimulate aggregate demands and resulting in a higher price. And some critics believe that Keynesian economics leads to heavy government intervention. They are that too much government involvement can lead to inefficiency and uh, disturbance in the economy. With it crowding out effect, critics argue that increasing government spending, especially when financed through borrowing, can crowd out private investment. This can be drive up interest rate, making it more expensive for businesses to borrow and invest. With it, some economics to contain that effective demand for planning policies may not achieve the desired effect if people anticipate the policy measure and adjust their expectation and behavior accordingly. With it, uh, critics argue that effective demand theory of employment policies often focuses on the short-term demand stimulation. They suggested that promoting productivity, innovation, and investment in productive capacity is crucial for sustained economic growth. With it, critics highlight that challenges in determining the timing and effectiveness of fiscal and monetary measures. They argue that political feasibility feasibility can be difficult to achieve and coordinating policies across different economic sector can be challenging. So students, the effective demand theory employment introduced by John Maynard is the fundamentally changed how economics understand the relationship between supply and demand supply, and it also emphasizes the role of demand in determining overall economic activities and employment level. No? So, hope student you well understood this theory. Now, thank you very much.